at the top of the hour. So I'll go ahead and call the School Board Finance Committee meeting for February 8th to start. So a couple topics that we want to cover off today. Just get an update from Kate, Sandy, and Diane on the budget development process, where we are, have a look at the calendar, make sure everyone's comfortable with the dates that we have laid out. Get an update on, or talk through a little bit more about the turf field, because we've had discussions, I think, in various groups, but it's really ultimately, I think, kind of up to this group to decide how we want to move that forward in terms of the financing of it anyway. And then I think maybe spend most of our time on the information and preparation for the town council, which Kate, I thank you so much for putting all that together. That was not a small amount of work, so really appreciate that. And I think they'll find it really very useful as well. And I found it very useful. So
I only got about halfway through because there were only a few questions that had straight answers, you know. Some of them, it's like the short answers and the essay questions in your final exam, right?
Yeah.
You got some essay questions to look at.
I think that's okay though. I mean, I talked to Councillor Anderson on Friday. We were like the liaisons, and I mentioned that I'm going to be on the meeting. I'm kind of assuming that Kristen and Leanne, if you guys are available, you might listen in either way. So I think that if they have questions or want clarification, they'll bring us in, which is fine too.
And Sarah, help me again. They're doing the meeting Wednesday night. Is that a full council meeting, or is that just their finance committee?
It's just the finance committee. Yep.
Okay.
Cool. Should we kind of start from easy and work our way down to maybe harder? We just start with the calendar.
Yeah, let's ease into this one.
Yeah. Leanne and Kristen, did you guys have a chance to breeze over the calendar? Yeah. Any concerns, questions, things you guys want to call out?
No.
It's at home.
Okay.
Did you guys want me to share anything on screen? Or are you happy looking at it offline? I know that can be kind of disruptive. On screen.
If you don't mind maybe pulling it up, I did have one thing I wanted to just raise. I think we did this last year, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that we as in the finance committee might have gotten like a preview in advance of the workshop. And I think the reason we did that was just to try and wrap our head around it, and you know, if there was any like burning questions that we all had, maybe provide an opportunity for you guys to have a little bit more clarification when presenting to the full board. I also think that that's like technically the way our policy is written, is that like finance is supposed to get a view of it before it goes to the rest of the board. I'm not all that concerned about that, but I do think if there's an opportunity, maybe the week prior to the workshop, I'm wondering if we could either have like a short finance committee meeting on that, or if we could just get access to anything in advance, like via email, to have a look through.
I would say yes, absolutely. I'm trying to remember. Last year was so odd because we had the whole sort of COVID fall apart moment. But I think what we did was we got the budget books out a little bit in advance, if I remember right. And,
yeah, I remember doing like a shady parking lot pickup for that.
a sneaky handoff. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But I think that well, first of all, my concept right now of the budget book is super hazy. I don't even like know where to start with that necessarily. I'm still pulling a lot of data together for just the line item stuff. But I think whatever kind of communication piece we're going to have as a guide to the workshops, we should definitely be able to get out that week prior. But should we have a proper meeting? Here I'm sharing screen and then I'm not actually showing you what.
No, I can see it.
Showing you. Can you see the calendar?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Good. Okay.
Yep. Leanne and Kristen, what do you think?
I think having the meeting would be really helpful. It would, I know it would give me extra confidence in knowing some of the questions I might want to ask, as well as having that kind of first chance to absorb the information, because it is so much.
Do we want to try to book something, or do we want to just know that that first week of March we want a meeting, and that you guys might be seeing something that's a little less polished? But I mean, by the time we get to that point, we better kind of know what we're talking about. And leadership team is going to obviously be spending that week before working on their messaging.
And just being selfish, if we could book it sooner rather than later, it makes it easier for me, because then I can block off that time from the calendar.
So we can put something on.
Does everyone have their calendars open and available now if we want to just try and do this? Does that Thursday work, the 4th? That's a school board meeting day, so I don't know if that's too much for you, Diane and Sandy.
We'll make it
All the
work.
time there is.
All the time in the world. That might actually be good, because we will have had our leadership meeting on Wednesday.
Yep.
We've got Colt on Thursday to kind of, clear some questions. And then if we had you guys Thursday, are you thinking, Sarah, right before the board meeting, or?
My schedule's pretty open that day, except in the morning, so I can do afternoon, I can do right before. Leanne and Kristen, what's your preference?
I'm free 11 o'clock on. I do have something that morning.
It doesn't matter to me at all.
Okay.
So we've got Colt meeting from 11:30 to 1. We're generally speaking way too talkative to get out by 1. Those usually run till 1:30. Then we all leave like going, oh my God, I wish we had more time. So would you want to do it? We could either nestle it right up against the board meeting, so you have everything like in one row, or we could do it like 3-ish.
If we could do it a little bit separate from the meeting, that would provide us an opportunity to replenish and perhaps grab a small snack.
Not die on camera.
Food? Yeah. What is like 3 to 4 or 4 to 5? What's better for you guys? You tell us.
Let's do 3 to 4. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
I see nods.
Yep.
All right.
That
So
works.
3 to 4 on March 4th. We'll add that to this calendar.
And I will take an action to reach out to Kelly to get that scheduled.
Okay.
All right. Great. And then the only other thing I wanted to just sort of chat about, Leanne and Kristen, was the timing of our first reading. So Kate put a note in there that we could move it back a week. I don't really feel strongly either way. I did just want to point out that is like a pretty big gap between when our first reading is and when town council's first reading is, which I don't actually think necessarily is a bad thing. Creating some separation there. But wanted to get your thoughts on that. I think we can also probably leave it in there, and if we need to move it, maybe we move it last minute, which again isn't preferred, but it is an option.
Yeah, it's kind of a you could go either way, really. You could make arguments either way. You're doing your first reading the week after you've had a chance to have the workshops, you've had a chance to have the materials, you've hopefully had a chance to ask questions, and maybe, first reading feels really comfortable right on the 18th. But because of the way the calendar falls, you've got that extra week in between, like you said, of when the council sees the whole budget.
Yeah. What do you guys think?
I mean, does anything typically happen between the workshops and our first reading? Like, is there a lot that needs to be done in that window?
There aren't really
Not really.
decisions to be taken or, actions to be taken. It's more a question of having the board have a chance to familiarize themselves with the budget resources before they're passing it in first reading. I mean, technically, you could pass it in first reading the day after the workshops. We've even done that before. Just because it's like, here it is. First reading isn't really, is the beginning of the work, not the end of the work.
I think the 18th is okay. I know historically for me, having the workshops and then accepting first reading, it's a little overwhelming. So there really isn't time to digest it all. So having that a week in between is selfishly really, really good. I don't think there's any reason to not do it that night. This is a first reading. We know there'll be changes that will come from it. Let's get it out there.
Cool. All right, that's good. The only thing I would just maybe keep in mind, and maybe Sandy, this is one for you, is if the agenda on the 18th becomes otherwise really long, I think we might want to just consider kind of pulling that out and having that be a separate piece on the 25th, just so it gets the attention that it deserves. But I think let's put it in there for now, and we can always adjust if we need to.
Would that mean adding another school board meeting on the 25th?
Yeah, it would be a special meeting because your regular meetings are the 4th and the 18th, the way the calendar falls.
Yeah.
So if you did that, yes, you would be doing it as a special meeting, just about the budget.
Which we've done before as well.
Yeah.
I think last year we did that.
I think we've done all the different dances here. I mean, we do, like what Sarah was saying earlier about the process, we do want to try to have the board's first reading occur before the budget is presented to the town council, because the board is supposed to be authorizing their part of the municipal budget ahead of time.
Okay.
I'll make a note of it,
think-
and hopefully we know so in advance. I think Kelly and I can try to make sure there's not a lot going on with a regular board meeting that night. It really,
Is that March 18th?
yeah, I think what I heard is keep it light as a regular meeting because of the first reading of the budget, right?
So the only thing I do happen to know that will have to go on March 18th is going to be the first reading of our school calendar. So we're trying to, we had a meeting this morning at 8 o'clock, and we're trying to work backwards from that March 18th day, because if you take a look at policy, it's supposed to come before the full board, before the April meeting. So that would be March 18th.
Yeah, and I think that's fine. I guess what I meant, if we have like 4 hours of content and this is one component of it, that may seem like a little unreasonable. But a couple of like normal items like that, I think is totally fine.
Okay,
Good.
So we'll leave it on the 18th for now. We can always adjust if something arises. I mean, the only other thing I could think would come up would be some sort of, extraordinary circumstance from the outside world. That we would want to consider and fold in. But I think, again, it's first reading. So those changes are going to happen throughout the process. And after first reading is fine too.
Great.
Cool. Any
All
other
right.
calendar?
I think we're good to go to get those workshops scheduled.
Yeah,
if you guys are.
I only put them in red because I reached out to the leadership team on Friday just to circle back, double check, make sure that that we weren't forgetting something super important that was going to happen on those days. I haven't had any negative feedback, so I've already put them on the calendar. And our work is going to be to decide whose section goes when, and get that all mapped out, calendared out. so we have a proper agenda for the workshops.
Awesome. Could we ask just that Kelly get some placeholders out for that, Diane or Sandy? Do you mind, just to the board so people can block that off in those calendars?
Yep, for the
Yeah.
budget workshops. Yep.
Thank you. All right. Anything else on the calendar? Are we good to move to the turf? Cool. All right. Sorry, Kate, I should have said there was a couple other bullet points in there. Was there anything else on the budget development process that you wanted to raise before we move on to the turf? Other than the calendar?
I was kind of thinking as I was putting all of this detail in here that, gosh, this is a really long meeting potentially. But what I thought I might do is just add this document to our online posting for the meeting as a supporting doc. And that way people can pop themselves into the attachments and take a look and see what's there. I did put a note in the update about the major takeaways from the staff budget listening sessions, because we had talked about that the last time. We hadn't really summarized them. This is like super quick bullet points, but the themes were really consistent and really strong. And it wasn't really hard to just say, oh, these are the things. Okay. So I thought that was important to share. I think most of the rest of the stuff you probably know. Some of it might be helpful when it comes to what the town council is looking at, depending on how far in the weeds they want to go. But apart from that, it's all good stuff.
Yeah, I think this is really helpful. And Leanne, I don't know, what you guys are thinking for communications too, but there could even be in some snippets in here too, like early budget planning, like what are the key themes and things like that.
I think definitely on the snippets, we'll be talking about that at 11:30, actually. We have a communications meeting this morning.
Going right into that conversation. Yeah. So,
and just a little foreshadow. Kristen put together a great timeline of when we can start putting out data and pieces. So this falls right into that.
Yeah, I think we were kind of successful, I think, in social media with those little kind of did you know fast facts kind of stuff. So hopefully there'll be some material here that you can make use of.
Oh, absolutely. And I think there's also really good technical information to start with the district newsletters for the information we're pushing there too. So there's a lot of opportunity to get the word out.
Yeah, I think the only thing that might be a little bit of a dance to talk about effectively is the negotiations piece, which is always an issue when you have open bargaining agreements and what can you say and what can't you say, and it always I feel like it's frustrating for the public because there are a lot of things that you just can't say this is what it is because it's either undecided or it's a subject of negotiation. So but apart from that, there's plenty of interesting little tidbits to share.
Oh yes.
Just on that piece, because I think you're right, Kate, like that seems to always be a frustrating point, not just for the public, but with some counselors as well. And I think we're better off this year than last year because last year we were negotiating the biggest bargaining unit. This year we're not, but I wonder if there's a way to give some information such as, the groups that we're bargaining make up X percentage of our personnel, budget, something like that, so that people can see that it, relative to our budget, what the impact of the negotiations are.
That's a good point because the two bargaining units that are in current contracts, actually three, because maintenance I think is in a current contract, they really do comprise the bulk of our personnel expenses. And these smaller groups, you're right, would presumably have somewhat less of an impact. So you're thinking in terms of like, I'd have to grab a specific data point. So I could say like in the FY21 budget, this bargaining unit represented X% of our estimated personnel costs.
Yeah, and we have, I'm spitballing here, you know, we have 3 bargaining units that are in negotiations. While we don't have like specific numbers on where that will fall, these groups generally make up X percentage of our overall budget.
Okay.
I think that's a great idea, because I bet it's 80% of the budget, just salaries alone.
Well, the salaries and benefits are definitely close to 80% of most budgets. I think what Sarah's saying is that these groups are actually the smaller ones. So a tick up or tick down in terms of the COLA that's negotiated or something like that isn't going to make an enormous difference. Like if you
Right.
did status quo for those groups, maybe, that's a way you could come at it. You could say, you know, the current cost of these groups is, no, but then you start getting into people sort of calculating COLAs and things, which can get a little slippery. Right. I'll start by just determining what portion of the personnel budget these guys make up, and we'll sort of brainstorm it a little bit more about what's the takeaway.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it may be a road we don't want to go down, but I guess I'm just trying to preempt some questions that we know we're going to get.
Yeah, and as I'm doing budget projections, I'm always gathering that kind of data, because it's the sort of question people ask. Well, you know, what's the increase in your budget that's attributable to teacher salaries? So that's why I put that line in there. You know, and what percentage does that drive and things like that. Those are popular questions, because it's something you can kind of wrap your head around in terms of impact.
Yeah. Okay, Leanne, KT, any thoughts or questions on the information that was in the budget process deck?
No, but thank you, Kate. That really was super helpful to see that in writing.
You're welcome.
Cool. Turfield.
Yeah, so for
So
I put a few notes down about like where we're at and what's been happening, again, so that when we post this up later, people can see sort of a snapshot of what's going on.
yeah, can you maybe just talk through this? I think some of the points to consider I would just like to get more thoughts from you on what you had put there.
So my thought about whether the project is in the school CIP budget or in the town CIP budget, it's not so much the budget, it's what comes after. I mean, I don't want to say it's not the budget, because we've all talked about what that impact might be on other projects, and you know what the perception would be of what the school needs, what the school is asking for in CIP. But I think that my biggest worry would be, let's say we put that in our budget. Let's say the town embraces the idea that the turf field is not going to continue to be usable in its current state. We need to replace it. We're good to go. We got a referendum. Everything is great. There's not the capacity in our current staff to run a project of that size.
Right.
So, you know, I'm really like 3 steps down the road, assuming that at some point we get the authority to do this project, then what does that actually entail?
And are these resources that if the town maintained ownership of it, they would have, or that we would need regardless, to your point of where the ownership sits or where the budget sits?
Yeah, I can't really speak for the town staff, but my guess would be that they'd be in a similar situation, that they would need some sort of a project manager, because I can't imagine that Todd Souza has a lot of spare time on his hands. And so he would be sort of like the parallel to Mike on the school side, or Mike and Todd Jepson, where you would have district personnel who would be the point of contact and the decision makers and have ultimate oversight of the project. But the day-to-day management of a project like that, you'd need a general contractor or a clerk of the works at least to follow that. And I think that would probably be true on the town side as well. It was interesting that the town manager was the one who suggested that we would probably want to find a project manager when we were in the conversation about this to kick it off.
I might be being a little bit slow here, but would a project manager be lumped into the cost of the project itself, or that would have to go in as staff?
The project manager would be part of the project itself. So
in the 1.5 million or whatever it costs.
Yeah, and part of what makes me a little itchy about this is that I'm not sure that's the right number. And I'm not sure what it includes, because I didn't see the original bid materials when the town originally set up the project. I know that Mike Legage and Todd Souza have been talking quite a bit about both mitigation and safety for the near term and the project in the far term. And we were going to try and get the person or the company that was selected to do the project through a bid process by the town, see whether those folks would be willing to update their estimate, because that estimate would have been from summer of 2019 and is likely to be a little on the stale side. And in the process of that, I would want to see what was included in that original estimate, and was there a project management piece? Was there an engineering piece? You know, what was the scope of that work that they were talking about at the time? Because again, to Sarah's point, I think that the town would have had similar problems just running a giant project like that.
Right. I'm glad you brought up the money, Kate. I'm really concerned about the number of 1.5. I don't think that's going to be enough. Even just the price of fuel, which is the baseline for the track side of this, because it's going to be a petroleum-based substance.
And oil's going up.
It's going up like crazy.
And construction costs are going up like crazy, right?
Correct, because it's a different time. So I'm really concerned that number is way too low. I'm also really concerned about the timing of it. In order to put it on budget, we just need to make sure that we're getting it at the right place with the communication, which then puts us to November. So if anything was to go sideways in November, we need to make sure we've got a backup plan for the spring in ensuring that the track athletes have facilities to use. So we're going to have to put deposits on that, which is also going to increase the costs. There's a lot to think about with this when it comes to that number.
Right, because we haven't included in this cost, nor did the town initially include any funding to relocate athletics while the work's being done, or, you know, to the point of these other bullet points, or while we're waiting for the work to be done if there's a safety issue.
Was the timing of going to referendum left up to the school department?
Well, the town has to set the referendum, so it would have to be a collaborative piece. Town council has the authority to set elections.
Right, but are they going to take your recommendation for when we should?
It was discussed. I think Diane and Sandy can help me out remembering. I believe April might have been the one who suggested, well, should we just have the referendum in June, and that way we can move forward quickly?
Right.
I think that the town manager was less excited about that because it was not it's not such a well-attended election. The only thing on the ballot, I think, for June, unless some state thing comes up, would be the school budget.
Well, and I think they were thinking that that was a pretty fast timeline because, again, you have to do some backwards planning around that in terms of, having that referendum available. So I think we're up against a pretty tight timeline for June.
Yeah, and I think that you're right, Diane. The point was, one of the big points was that communication and outreach is going to be really critically important to get this passed. And, the board has already said they're 100% behind it, but that doesn't mean they can wave a wand and get the community on board in a couple of months.
So the consensus is sort of November referendum would be the preferred.
But
I think
I think if it was in,
more information.
What?
I was just going to say that I think we need to collect more information about what are the hard fast dates and what would that look like.
Yeah, and I don't
the
really
other,
have an answer to that. I mean, it's, to me, a vote in June or a vote in November, they both have their benefits and they both have their drawbacks. But I do think Diane's right. If we're launching a massive PR campaign to educate the public on the value of this project, that might be pretty quick with a few things going on between now and June.
Well, this is also going to affect, right, what Mike will have to find alternate field space for, right, depending on when it actually gets started.
Yeah, and so that's a worry as well. Mike had originally, when we first went to referendum, Mike had a whole plan outlined whereby he was going to be able to move spring sports to the colleges. Had a really great offer from USM for some of their campus facilities, because typically college sports are done sooner than high school sports. They're basically out and graduated in May when we're in the middle of our season. So he reached out to USM just last week again, and they're kind of we're not even letting people on campus. We're not opening our facilities. So it's unlikely that this spring, at least, that we would even have that option. And then, of course, in the fall, it's hard. If you can't use the fields in the fall, that's when college fields, they're in full swing as well. So the scheme would have worked really well with if the referendum had passed in November of 19 and then we were doing it in the spring of 20, we could have timed it out well without huge impact to sports programs.
cool. So we definitely need an updated number for that. Is that something that we can get for at least the budget workshops?
I'm not sure how willing the firm is going to be that did the original estimate, because they were doing it based on the fact that we had budget authority and that the project was moving forward and that they had been awarded the project. It would be a question of goodwill for them to give us a better ballpark. But we've certainly asked them. I think Mike and Todd have been collaborating, trying to get some more detail. And barring that, I guess we would have to go out and do some more research. I'm not sure how many companies would do this kind of work. I'm pretty ignorant in this, actually, not being involved in it the last time around.
I have a question about Go Forward, because it sounds as though this is pretty much a done deal. Do we need to then add additional resources or staffing in order to maintain the fields on a Go Forward? Because the town was responsible for all of the maintenance.
Yeah.
And I know we were paying for half of the equipment that we use on it. Would that mean that all of the equipment costs of the field would now belong to the schools moving forward and replacement?
So the way that we left that piece with the town manager and Todd Souza in the meeting on the 26th, was that it would be really hard for us to bite off both projects at the same time. That I don't think anyone really disagreed that it makes sense for the school to manage the school's fields because we're the primary user of them. But the idea that we would take on both a really complex construction project and relocating all of our athletics programs potentially off of that area with whatever, you know, management that would entail, and then also become responsible for cleaning and striping and mowing and painting and whatever, that was a pretty big ask for the school department. So my suggestion to the town manager was, can we use this next year to actually identify what the budgetary implications are and the staffing implications are of our doing that work instead of the town doing that work? And I know that Tom Hall and Todd Souza are both just really kind of over it and ready to do other things. And I don't disagree with them and I completely get it. But I don't think that we're ready for them just to wash their hands of it after 20 years. And now we flip a switch and we're geared up and ready to go. So it would definitely involve more staffing. It would definitely involve someone to run rec track. It would definitely involve more maintenance personnel or, you know, something of that sort, groundskeeping personnel. And I think it should be fairly simple to identify what that means because the community services is currently doing it. So they should be able to say, this is how much time and how much resources and how much staffing we have to do this work. And if we hand it over to you guys, this is how much you're going to need as well.
Okay.
It's overwhelming.
Do we know, maybe you guys could give us a little preview of what else is going to be in our CIP this year? Because I think like Kristen and Leanne, you know, we have to make a recommendation to the board based on what Sandy and Kate and Diane come back with and staff comes back with on whether or not we want to include this in our CIP. My personal feeling is if we can do so without having to sacrifice anything that already exists in there, then I'm fine to do it. And I would recommend that to the board. What are your thoughts on that?
I would agree with you on that. And, you know, I'm assuming the town council is going to give some consideration to the fact that this is not technically our responsibility at the moment, right? So I hope they're a little flexible with our CIP.
I would agree with that completely. And I would also ask for assurances that this is, it doesn't have any long-term impacts to large projects that we are asking for, that it's not going to be seen as you got something, now it's somebody else needs to get something. Because we do have some really big things looming on the horizon.
Yeah, and that's a worry, right? Because you could get an assurance from the town council that they don't see it that way, but you know, the public is going to have to come out and vote in referenda, and they don't necessarily have all the background about who owns what and who's asking for what. So we've got to be really careful about not pointing fingers and saying, oh, this is, you know, those greedy people want their thing, and you know, which set of greedy people are they? To answer the question about the scope of our CIP, Todd and I actually haven't nailed that down yet. We're still working on that. We have another meeting this week on that topic. I will say that CIP last year was $2.4 million, and that includes technology, buses, everything. Last budget cycle for this year, we came out with a $3 million proposal that was cut down to 1.8 million. So there will be some items that were dropped off of the facilities budget in particular that we'll have to go back and regroup. I mean, we can't leave the roof on the building that was supposed to be done this year that didn't get done. Go another year. So stuff like that is going to come back around. And if this project is, 1.5 or 2 million, it's going to make a big jump.
In the planning costs for a consolidated school, those go into the CIP, correct?
Yeah, so last year, I gotta get my years right. So I'll label it in FY21, we had started out with a placeholder of 100,000, which was really my error in calculating what it would cost to engage in the first stages of the building project, because I was looking at Wentworth as an example of what that might cost. And unfortunately, I didn't look back far enough. There had been some prep work done before a failed referendum, and then they came back and did some final work. So the true cost was more closer to 400,000. It was about 350. And so we went back and forth about putting that extra money into FY21, and ultimately we kept the 100,000, which is still in our FY21 budget, and we didn't add to it. So there would be another, what did we say, 250? I'll go grab another document here.
I think the total that we, like Kate said, we're trying to get to is 350. So we would need another 250, but similar to everything else, we might want to get an update on that estimate.
Yeah, no doubt.
Which is something we'd want to do now so that we can have the appropriate number in the budget. So Katie, I don't know if that's maybe an action you want to take or something to reach out to like one of the people on the building steering committee and just try and get an estimate from them on whether they would anticipate that cost increasing at all due to just whatever, the market. Krista, is that something that you can do?
Sure. Do we even? I think I probably need to call Hillary and talk to her a little bit about where they sort of left off.
Yeah.
With that group.
Yeah, I just don't want us to be in the same position we were in, where we're like, we put money in and then we find out after the fact that it's actually not enough to do what we want to do.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm staring off into my other screen here trying to find the exact amount. But it was under 400. I think it was 3. All right, we'll find it.
I just wonder if this year could be a teachable moment for the community, town council, that, we're more than happy to take over the fields and track. In the perfect world, when we take things over like that, we'd rather not have them broken and have to put all the money into the fields and track. And this is a lesson as we think about our elementary schools, that we don't want to wait until they collapse and then we have to do something on an emergency situation. So I know you all know that, but I'm kind of stuck with that. While I appreciate what the town wants us to take on, I kind of go to my bad place every so often with this project because it's costly. It's a lot of money, and it didn't pass the last time, and we've got to have it pass this time.
You bring up a really good point, Sandy. A solid point of where the field is at and are taking it. And I didn't want to mention it before, but I have a deep-seated concern about the optic to the school board, because in the community, there are times when we've been told that we cry wolf a lot, and this is not a wolf moment. This is serious. This field needs to be replaced.
Whoops.
I don't know. It may be me who's dropping out because my internet, it keeps giving me notices that I'm not behaving well. I'm just really concerned about all of this because it is in such a bad space. It has to be fixed. I wish there was a way that we could do it so it wasn't either, that it wasn't just all on us and our budget to make it happen.
Yeah, it's a little frustrating because I felt in that meeting with the town folks that they were like, you know, we got other fish to fry. You guys are the ones who use it. Maybe you could have better luck than we have. And, you know, not trying to sound flip about it, but there didn't appear to be any will to collaborate. It was more like, we're done. Y'all want to give it a shot. And so we're between a rock and a hard place. We can't do without it. You know, we could tear it up and put some grass seed down, but that's a project in itself. And yeah, I mean, we're kind of backed into a corner with it.
Can we get any sort of commitment from them? Or I don't know if you can speak to what their tone was as far as, because this is going to be a lot of communication work and carefully crafted stuff. I mean, is Allison available to us? Did they offer any support in terms of community outreach? Can we use Allison to help?
Good question. I don't think that was discussed at all. I think it was more of a, you know, here's where we are and here's what we'd like from you. I don't believe that there was any discussion about offering resources except a hearty handshake.
Well, maybe we can
Yeah, I would. Yeah, definitely look into that. I think that's a fair ask. Look, I think I'm not as frustrated as you guys are, but I think at the end of the day, like, if it's doing what's best for our students is to drive this forward, and we should put all of our weight behind it, including, you know, offering to put this in our CIP if we need to. So I think, you know, part of what my video just dropped out. Can you guys still hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
You get
I
funny look
think
on your face, but you're talking fine.
well, my Zoom just crashed. Good thing I'm dialing over my phone. I'll try and log back in. But yeah, I think the action is really on us to provide, you know, when we send all this information to town council for their workshop on Wednesday, we'll say that we're working on getting an updated estimate, but that we do still have other things that are going to come forward like previous years in our CIP budget. And we just don't want this to take the place of any of those items. Cool.
No, I agree with Sarah. I don't think we really have a choice. We're sort of backed into a corner. If we want to continue to use the field, we've been
Right.
given the opportunity to make that happen.
Yep. Cool. Okay, so a couple actions there. It sounded like, you know, Todd and Mike are already trying to get an update, so that's great. Presumably that'll make its way into some sort of budget presentation, whether it's the workshop or first reading, whenever you guys get that. And then, yeah, KT, if you can try and figure out some sort of estimate around this is unrelated to the TURF, but related to CIP, just around the cost that we would need, the total cost we would need to progress the school project, that would be helpful as well.
Yeah, I did find that we had put in 375 as our number for that. And then again, we dialed it back to 100,000. So if we don't do anything with the $100,000 in this current year, we have the budgetary authority to use it to add to it next year as well. And that's probably a question for another day. Is there work that we could currently do with 100 grand that would help us?
Okay, so I'm back, but it looks like now we lost KT.
So Spectrum on our side of town is lovely, isn't it?
It's a jumpy meeting. I did want to just point out that Mike and I and Jordan had a big conversation on Friday about what would we do for spring if it's determined that the field isn't safe to use. And so, I mean, that's Mike's point of urgency right now because spring season's coming up in 10 minutes. So we did feel that we had identified sufficient money in the current budget, in his operating budget, where there are monies that he hasn't had to spend. Really minimal cost for ice time this year, minimal cost for pool time because of the cutback of the seasons, and much less cost for refs, officials, game management, that kind of stuff. So we feel like we have enough space if it's necessary to get off the field in the spring. So in the immediate short term, that's something that Mike and Jordan are working on hard right this minute. And then, you know, with an eye to what's the timeline for the rest of it.
Okay, great. Welcome back, Kristen. Pine Point Internet.
Yeah.
I know, and I thought I had my hotspot on, but apparently I didn't.
I'm actually using the hotspot. My Zoom just is awful. Okay, cool. Anything else on the turf field?
So
All right.
we've agreed that we'll go ahead and put something in the school CIP budget, and then it can just continue to be a topic of conversation at that point through that process.
I think so, yep.
Okay. Cool. And you know, there are a lot of times we put a project into CIP and we're not sure what the right number is. Witness the building project question of last year, but you know that Todd's always out getting quotes and refining our numbers before we get up to first reading anyway. So this will just be folded into that process and we'll see how close we can get.
Awesome. All right, so moving on to town council questions workshop. So the goal of their workshop, and I spoke to Councilor Anderson, and I think there was some debate amongst the three of them, so him, Betsy, and John Cloutier, on whether or not they really needed a workshop with the goal of setting goals for the first and second reading. I kind of explained to him like the process where we are right now and the sort of guiding principles that we've put together, or that you put together for the Leadership Council as they're developing their budget. And I don't want to speak for John, and maybe he'll mention this on Wednesday, but I think he felt that was sufficient in terms of getting to the first reading, and didn't necessarily think having a first reading goal for the school was a necessity. But I don't know where ultimately they're going to land on that. And so in addition to sharing all this information, I think what we want to go back to them with is, you know, if they were to come up with a first reading goal, what would we want that to be? Again, my preference is that we don't have one. But I think if there is going to be one, I think the way that we did it last year, which was based off of net expenditures, and not anything related to a mill rate, just related to the number itself, would be my preference on how we go about it.
Because those are the things we can control, right? That's all we can control.
Exactly. Leanne, Kristen, what are your thoughts?
I would agree with that, Sarah. The whole mill rate thing is tough at best for us since we don't see that whole picture.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think just generally too, like maybe Kate and Diane, Sandy, you guys will tell me that you would prefer to have a goal, but I think if there's going to be goals for the school first reading, we should be the ones that are setting them, and not necessarily coming from town council. But I think they'll have, you know, what they ultimately want to get to, and they kind of just work back and say, well, for us to get to X at the end of the day, you guys need to come in around, you know, Y, and maybe that's what they come forward with. Hopefully it doesn't change anything in terms of how you guys are going about thinking about this or developing the budget. If you would prefer more concrete direction, then that's something that, you know, you should raise, and we can talk about how we can get you guys that. But I think it seems like things are going okay.
Yeah, and I think what you've just described, Sarah, is exactly what you started this whole conversation with this budget cycle, right? That was a shift I heard you say in previous meetings and others say, which is, you know, the school board wants to kind of lead and direct the message for the ask. And then changes can be made as needed later in the process. But your, you know, primary responsibility right now is to generate what is the need of the school department.
Yeah. I think that's our opinion of this group, and that's, yeah.
Yeah, I think in
So-
terms of, for me, a town council goal, the way we came to an idea of what that should be last year was completely mathematical, and it was based on figuring out what would likely drive to a 3% or less tax increase based on past history. I think Sarah has been really articulate in some of her emails back and forth with us about the fact that this year is an anomaly, and that both the budget that we were approved for this year and the operating expenses and budget management this year are both just bizarre and driven by outside circumstances and not the norm. And so when I did this tax request chart that I updated that's linked in here, I did a couple of different scenarios. I did the 5 years that we based last year's calculations on, just net budget on each one. I added this year, FY21, did a 6-year, and then I did a 5-year dropping out the first year of last year's projection. And I think the problem with including FY21 in those calculations is that it's going to drive the numbers down, right? Because our increase in our tax request was so much. The increase was so much lower in FY21 due to the pandemic circumstances that, you know, that's going to skew our average number or geometric mean lower. And, you know, is that a good place to start from? Or should we say that FY21 is just not really part of our conversations? And, you know, like I said, Sarah's been really articulate about that, as I'm looking back at my normal projections for electricity, or my normal projections for use of natural gas, or the ways that I normally calculate where we need to be in the coming year, I have to remember that, oh, schools are shut. Oh, we don't have outside visitors. Oh, you know, we had an unusually mild winter, which I would figure out anyway. But there's so many strange factors that if this team was going to be setting a goal, I would probably skew more towards what we calculated for last year than trying to add in FY21 as a reasonable variable. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. And I think that's actually a point that I just noted down that I'll share with them as well, that if we're going to be given a target of any sort, that it should be calculated based off of FY21-20 budget development cycle and not this one, or not last year.
I'm just going to pull this up real quick.
This is my favorite Kate Bolton document.
Is it? Well,
Yeah.
it's a Kate Bolton, April Scyther collaboration because I was just doing averages and she was like, no, geometric mean. I'm like, oh, math teacher, okay, right on. So yeah, the first one is the one that we used in last year's budget development process. And then if you add FY21 in the second row and you do a 6-year geometric mean, it drops to 4.77. If you do a 5-year and you drop out FY15 and add FY21, you get 4.75. But what's interesting is if you look at the tax rate, the actual town tax rate, you see the increase here. Can you see my cursor?
Yeah.
Yep.
So the increase from 15 to 16 was under 3%. The increase from 16 to 17, under 3%. 17 to 18 was over 3%. Then you've got 0. You've got the reval that dropped everything by 11%. And then last year's increase on the tax rate was only 1%. So, coming to what's the correct number, I think is going to be sort of, it's a math problem, but it's also a philosophy question, right?
Mm-hmm. The 3% continues to be just such a funny goal in my mind because it's like, I think it's a reasonable number to be under, but history tells us that we've generally been under it by actually more,
right,
by a lot.
Right.
So it's just a funny, anyway, we don't need to go down that dark road.
Okay.
Cool. So I think, I don't know, Kate, if you want to pull up the document that you put together that answers some of the questions. I think what I was planning to do is just take that and then maybe add some other commentary to it. And then I'll send that over to them with, some of these other materials that you have linked here too. But I think there was a couple in there that might have been unanswered that we might want to discuss how we respond to them.
Yeah, so like I said earlier, I did the short answers, the facts, and I did link in some stuff, the average of cost per student. So this is me being like a data nerd. Like I want to not just tell you what our per pupil expenses were for the last 5 years. I want to tell you what all the surrounding districts had and where they spent their money and what different categories they spent their money in. And there's 2 tabs in this and it's really super exciting to me. So like, okay, here, have this. Usually in January, they'll put up, at the state level, they'll put up the numbers for the prior year, but I haven't seen them yet for 20. So this only goes through 19. But my favorite piece of this is that you look at the types of spending, and Scarborough's like in the middle on student instruction, in the middle on staff support, at the very basement of school and system admin, which is why I get mad when people say we spend so much money on administration. Higher than the average on special education because we're so good at it. And in the basement on transportation and facilities, and higher than the average on debt service because we keep doing things all by ourselves without any state help. All right, so that was a quick tour.
Great summary.
That is important to highlight to them because anyone can open that document and see what they want to see in it. So I almost feel like everything that you just said should be spelled out because, well, like I said, they can see what they want to see in that, but those are important things to note.
I talked really fast though.
I think I might be able to I think I might be able to do that though. Based on what you just said, and I'll summarize it what I think I heard, and you can edit it, Kate, if you want after I read it.
I'm sure it'll be.
But I think
it'll be perfect.
I think you're right, KT. That's useful information to have. Cool.
Yeah. So then there were just questions about money coming in. I just cut and pasted this contractual increase or fixed cost stuff. That's just directly pasted from our own document. Let's see, what do we have here?
Can you, off the top of your head, Kate, do you know what the teachers' bargaining unit, what of the 80% of the, so our personnel budget is roughly 80% wages and benefits. How much of that is teachers? Do you know?
I don't know off
I think
the
it's like
top of my
70s.
head. Yeah,
Okay.
I would, it's obviously it's the lion's share of it, but I don't know exactly. But I have a note to find out the
Yeah.
groups that are currently being bargained, so that could be a piece of that question.
Yeah, I was just trying to think if I could look backwards from whatever they make up. The difference is roughly the groups that are negotiating.
Right.
Okay, thank
That
you.
won't be a super hard number to get. On this question I think they're asking about non-staff investments. So in operating, most of our investments have been staffing increases for special education and enrollment. But I linked it in anyway. The capital budget is easy enough. All I did was just put our totals for the past 5 years. And I think, like I said a little earlier, we started out with an ask of a little over 3 million in FY21 and landed with 1.8. But the amounts apart from FY20 have been pretty modest, pretty similar year over year.
Do you think that there would be value in kind of hitting the highlights in terms of like what was included in that 1.8 million last year? What was included in the 2.4 million? Because I'm thinking that like they're trying to get underneath that in their question, right?
And that actually raises a really good question in my mind. How deep do they want to go? Because I had originally heard that they weren't really necessarily all that interested in getting in the weeds. But we could certainly give them.
So I think part of it is like they're not interested in getting into the weeds until they are, right? And then they are, and they want to know where the information is. And so sometimes, perhaps be like having all of that, even if it's not to say, and here's all the detail, but just having it at the ready so that it doesn't hold up conversation if they do go there.
Well, we definitely have detailed budget documents for CIP. And we have, for operating, we've got the investment worksheets that we've done for a few years that are like level services, reduced level services, ads, investments. Those have been kind of helpful. We could go to those. And that was kind of what I was looking at when I looked at operating. And I grabbed these numbers. Sorry, I'm jumping around a bit here.
It's okay.
And I added a column or a row for pandemic investments. But basically, this tells you that in the operating budget, the things that were level services on the top row, just carrying on with what we were doing. And then required investments is, it's in some cases it's a shorthand for special education, required in terms of like IEPs and one-to-one staffing and so forth. And in some cases it's sorry, I got distracted by the lack of a emphasis on this. That's really sad. Sorry. In some cases, it's been like building staff. And then other investments has been mostly driven by enrollment lately. Enrollment and some curriculum stuff. So this last row is actually a little bit out of the ordinary because we did invest more in things that weren't just level services, but we reduced level services by about $2 million to get there.
Right.
I think Diane's right. I think at some point they're gonna want this information. I do also want to make sure when some of these conversations are happening that we're at the table. And so I think this might be sufficient for, and first of all this information is available if people want it already, just through like old meeting content and stuff like that. So it's not like we're hiding it. But I would say this seems like a reasonable level to share for the purposes of the workshop. And then if they want a deep dive on anything, we should do a joint finance committee meeting. That would be my recommendation.
So for CIP, I can just pull together summaries for, I did a 5-year totals, but I can give the 5 years in more detail.
I think this question specifically was asking for things that weren't capital, right?
Well, it says
Or am I reading that
non-staffing
wrong?
or, oh, well, I'm not sure if I put the or in the right place in my mind. Non-staffing or capital related. I thought it was non-staff investments in operating and capital. So I probably misread that.
Again, I think this is fun. I interpreted that because this answers it. You put the information in there to answer whether, regardless of how we interpret it. But I think that they were looking more for like curriculum and enrollment increases and things like that.
Right.
That was how I interpreted it anyway.
So the operating chart will give you that, but actually, if you look at the operating chart, the investments are more personnel than anything else. So there's really we don't really have a breakdown that says this is how many new people were added versus this is what curriculum we bought. We'd have to sort of tease that out from other documents, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Is there any more color you could provide for the fund balance? Because that always seems to be a hot topic. For them.
So the fund balance at the end of FY20, the audit's still not done, by the way. We're later than ever. The town is having a really hard time getting things done. But, sorry, I'm reaching for. Yeah, I linked every document I could think of into here, and I still am not looking for documents.
Kate, while you're looking that up, are all of these documents that are linked accessible to anybody who has the link?
I think so, yeah. I tried to set it so that anybody who could click on it could open it. If you find across one that doesn't look right, let me know. But I did try to test drive them a little bit. All right, here we go. So at the end of FY20, we were looking at an undesignated fund balance, which means available for whatever, of $668,000. In the FY21 budget, we're using $700,000 as revenue. So our goal was to not have to fill a hole and drop that amount in FY22, because let's say we had to go down to $500,000, then we'd already have a $200,000 revenue loss to account for before we even got out of the gate on higher expenditures. So having $668,000 in the bank today means that I can promise, without being nervous about it at all, that we can have 700,000, because we'll certainly have that much breakage. What I think that the council is likely to wonder, and I'm likely to wonder myself, is will we have more than that? And will it make sense to allocate more fund balance in FY22? My worry about that is then what happens in FY23, because at some point you got to back off on fund balance, and you're not going to generate $1 million in fund balance every year going forward if we return to our normal mode of operation. Some years we have less than 200,000. Typically we have 300, maybe 400,000 in fund balance. But if we do generate a lot of extra fund balance in FY21, my advice would be to hang on to as much as we can to use in FY23's budget.
Okay. So just to make sure I completely understand, the 700,000 is savings from the current the fund balance from last year, plus any savings from that we have from this year as well, anticipated savings.
Exactly. So we already have in the bank most of the 700,000, which is very reassuring and lovely. And in FY21, we will have no trouble making up the difference. What I think will happen is that in FY21, we will also generate a fairly significant fund balance. I'm looking at facilities having a lot of unspent funds. I was looking at athletics having unspent funds, but now we're back in business, and they're also trying to think about retrofitting things for the spring. So I'm not really looking at that as a place where we're likely to have excess funds. But we'll have our typical breakage and personnel turnover and things like that, and we'll probably generate a couple $100,000. The other place that's a little worrisome is school nutrition, because we have to make up that deficit at the end of the year. And we were just talking with Peter the other day. He was so sort of sad because he was so poised to be able to finally make some money in school nutrition, and now we're not selling anything. We're providing free lunch to all students, which is awesome and fantastic. And we're getting as much subsidy as we possibly can. We're getting about 3 times the subsidy we usually get from the feds. But even that isn't really sufficient to cover costs without food sales. So there'll be a deficit there to cover as well.
Can I ask a question about that, Kate?
Sure.
Are we required to be providing free lunch to every single student?
Yes.
That is, we're not allowed to charge for lunch right now?
We're not allowed to charge for lunch right now if we want to participate in the USDA's school lunch program. And that's where we get subsidy from the feds. Now, we could say we don't want to belong to that program at all. We would receive no subsidy from the feds. So, we'd lose a few $100,000 in subsidy, and then we would have to turn around and make that up in sales. So financially, it probably doesn't make sense right now to try to do that. But I think ethically, it makes a lot of sense to just feed the kids and take what the feds are willing to give us.
It does. I think just from my perspective, and I'm really glad that everyone who needs food is able to access food, just to be clear about that. But today is the first day that one of my kids is actually going to school and getting lunch. And I would have preferred to have paid for it, but I don't have that option to do that.
Right.
I think it's hard because I think a lot of people would be willing to contribute to the nutrition program, knowing that in a normal year they would, and we just don't have that choice. So it's hard to swallow.
It is hard. And it would also be really nice if the feds would say, we want you to feed all the kids for free, and we're going to give you enough money to cover your costs instead of a third of it.
Right.
That would be super helpful.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I know that a lot of people have expressed to me that they don't feel comfortable taking free lunch because they don't need it. We're still getting lots of donations and things, but it's an awkward situation to be in because you don't really want to disrespect or question people about their financial status. A lot of people who don't necessarily look like they're in need might actually be in this moment. And that sort of blanket pardon is a nice way to get around that. But you're absolutely right. It is an imperfect system at best.
It is, but we do have a way that parents are aware of that should they choose to donate, they know how to go about doing that. I mean, I know that I can.
Yeah, well, and okay, so there's something for communications.
Yeah.
When we first closed in March, we put out a big plea about helping the backpack program. And you know, folks like Kelly Murphy were using their networking to drag in a ton of food and you know, feed a ton of folks and lots of money. And we do have notice on the website on the school lunch page about how to donate. We've got, they can do it through RevTrack. They can send me checks, but maybe, you know, it wouldn't hurt, because I have had people say to me, well, should I really be giving money now since you're getting money from the feds?
Well, and I think maybe if the communications committee took a different tact and said, you know, did you know, that we have been receiving subsidy for all of our students, but that does not cover the cost. We are currently $200,000 in the red, or, giving that piece of information, so that, not to say we want people to start paying, but if there are other families, that are thinking the way that you might be, Kristen, that say, gosh, I kind of had it in my mind that I was spending $30 a week on my kids' school lunch, and I'm in a position where I could make a donation to the lunch program every once in a while, or, do something different. But, I think the way in which that gets worded is really critical, so that no one felt that it was required, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
agree.
and we have actually discouraged parents from putting money in their kids' accounts, because that's money that ultimately they turn around and it costs us to provide the meal at some point. And it's not necessary right now, but we haven't really done a plea for covering our own costs for donations since the springtime.
Right.
This is all gonna, I mean, I'm assuming this isn't continuing into next year. Is that a fair assumption to make?
We've heard from the state school nutrition program manager, Mr. Beasley, has said that he believes we're going back to normal for the fall.
Okay.
Business as usual. And, that's kind of been the DOE's song that they've been singing right along about everything, that we're going to be back to the old way of doing things.
Yeah, I mean, and that's hard, because it would be nice to have more donations at that point too, because just because schools might go back to business as usual doesn't mean that everyone's financial circumstances are going to go back to normal. There might be still a huge need for food assistance.
Right. And that's something that, we would handle through the free and reduced lunch program too. But, that you're right. There's a lot of folks that might be in that sort of bridge moment where things aren't normal and they might be getting there, but not quite.
Thank you.
Hey, guys, yeah, no, good discussion. I just realized we only have a couple minutes left, and I know you guys have another meeting to hop directly to. Kate, if you don't mind scrolling down. So I think, I don't know necessarily how to go about sharing this. Maybe we don't have enough time to talk about all these bullets now. So usually you guys come up with enrollment estimates as part of the budget cycle.
Yeah, and that one I think I can dismiss fairly quickly, because we don't know the answer yet. We've been working around that for about 3 weeks now, and running a bunch of different scenarios of, here are the kids we have now, here's who might come back, here, here's the projections that we have. Do they fit? How do they fit? So that's definitely a work in progress right now. Still wrestling.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about most of these, right? We talked about the turf field for capital investments. We'll get that when we get the budget in a couple of weeks. Funding priorities, so I can just point them to the themes that have been coming out of your budget development or listening sessions and feedback from staff, but also the focus on what are our must-haves that we've talked about. The last bullet, I'm sure you guys could write a dissertation on things that you've learned. That
Yeah, I
might be
think
more of like a,
that those conversations have been kind of interwoven in all of our meetings with the building leaders and the department heads. And, you know, every one of those conversations has called out, oh, we had this, you know, software that we use that everybody loves it, and we're going to continue that. But in most of those cases, I would say that there are tweaks in the existing budget and in the existing operations. Like, oh, we learned that it's better to schedule 2 small recesses than 1 large recess. But that's not, you know, that's like how you deploy your staff, right? It's not asking for 3 more ed techs, so you're going to have more recesses. Or we learned that this software is really effective, so we're going to tie this together with these books that we're buying. But it's, again, a reallocation. I haven't really heard anybody say, we need this new thing that's going to cost X on top of everything else that we're doing.
gotcha.
I don't know. That's a really sort of vague way to say it, but I think that's also an ongoing conversation. We kicked off a little bit of a workshop with the leadership team this past week to process through some of the lessons learned, because we've been running so hard and doing so much work and not having a chance to reflect, except on the fly. That some other sort of themes might come out of that as well. But in terms of what going to impact the budget, I think everybody's been really cognizant that they need to not be asking for the moon, something that they don't already have.
Okay. I mean, I'm pretty confident that or comfortable. I can put some just general responses to these, and some of them are, you know, we're working on it. You'll have it in a couple of weeks. I don't think there's anything that we can't answer now that should impact their ability to do what they want to do on Wednesday night, which is come up with some goals. So some of this information may just be useful over the course of the next couple months. So I will take a stab at putting.
It'll be interesting
Kate,
to see what they think about the federal money, because that seems to be a very a hot topic. Like, what did the schools do with all that money, and are they going to get more money, and who's getting money, and what does it mean?
Hopefully.
I would love it if the town would get some money.
There was a really good document that the communications team pulled together. KT, thank you so much for taking lead on that. If you haven't seen it, we'll make sure that it's over. We might need to work on it on the back end, but we'd really like to get that communication out as part of the town newsletter, just to make sure that we're communicating what we've done with that money, because to your point, it is an area of interest. Yeah. And how did we utilize those funds, and how did they come in? So if we could work on that, I believe we need to get that for the 15th. So at the end of the week, we'd need to have it to Allison to be included in the town newsletter, if that's something that we want to publish.
That sounds really cool. I did link in the CRF report that we went over as a finance committee, and I think that's, Leanne, where you were kind of taking some of those notions from. But that if we have it as a more sort of layperson's info sheet, that would be probably more useful to these guys. Okay. My spreadsheets are a little dense.
I'll link these, but Leanne, I'll let them know that something else is coming as well.
Okay.
And is there anything you need from me on that?
Yes. Or we're definitely going to want to get you and Kate's input on this to make sure that you're in agreement with the direction that it was going. If you'd want to change anything, it really was just that first step of putting the communication together.
I sent that to you on Friday, Sarah. Did you get it?
I'm sure I did. Yeah, I have some time out this afternoon to do some school board stuff, so I'll do that then.
I think the one piece we had to add in, which I think Kate has in here somewhere, is the second round of ESSER funds.
Okay. Cool. Well, listen, I know you guys got to hop. So Kate, thanks again for pulling all this together. I will try and summarize this and send it off to the town so they have everything they need for Wednesday night.
Cool.
Thank you,
Awesome.
guys.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Enjoy
Thank
your
you.
communication meeting.